Special Operation Forces are training with Ukrainians in Europe, but what are they training for? You're listening to the Propaganda Report. I'm Brad Binkley here with Monica Perez. Monica, happy Pronoun Day.
Oh, thank you very much. Thanks you very much.
Thank you. Or they. Or Z.
Thanks you.
I'm telling you that they pronoun is going to be confusing for a lot of people.
It's driving me nuts. I'm seeing it everywhere. It's on signs. It's like, oh, all individuals are entitled to their space. This was like at a gym I was at, like the YMCA or something. And it was like, they are to be respected. It's like, no, it's not they. Then just restructure the rest of the sentence. You know what I'm saying? Like, don't make it an individual thing.
Well, they're going to have to overhaul grammar here in a few years if we keep changing things up like this, because I know older generations or people who aren't in school are going to be really confused. I don't know how they're teaching this in schools. I'd be interested in knowing that. Point.
My son goes to, like, this is an accident. I'm so stupid. I didn't realize, like, private schools had different reputations for their kind of politics. So he goes to, like, the super, super, super liberal school, and it's too late to turn back now. Plus, he can handle it, but I wonder how they do that, because it's a really good school. They really care about education. How do they, I mean, they, on their, like, 8th grade graduation, they said, well, you can choose between wearing a suit or wearing a dress. And, like, they kept saying, so if he or she chooses to wear a suit or a dress, and one of the parents, like, was foreign, she raised her hand, she's like, what are you talking about? It's just like, who wears the what? And the guy was like, we're just trying not to be binary, like, which didn't clarify
anything at all.
Exactly. So how they are non-binary in English, it's not even binary. It's like, it's not zeros and ones, it's ones and twos. It's not, you know what I mean? It's not he or she, it's he or they. It's a numbers question.
I noticed some people talking on Facebook referring to a white guy as a typical cisgender white man. Right. The guy had done something wrong, I guess. And I'm like, what? I know what cisgender is because I've heard it long enough. Mm-hmm. But I don't refer to myself as cisgender.
Cisgender means your pronoun matches your orientation or your physiology.
I guess I don't know it specific enough to answer that question, because I don't know.
It's really hard.
I just know that I am referred to as a cisgender, and I didn't accept that label. Nobody
but you don't
asked
have to be
me.
Straight to be cisgender.
What I want to refuse the label, though. I don't want to own. I mean, you can't just give me a new word.
Yeah, but you define by choosing your own. By choosing a pronoun, you get that label or you don't, and you can't control it.
So if I choose not to choose a pronoun, I get the pronoun endowed upon me by progressives, is what it appears.
Yes. And actually, I just discovered in one of the Quora things a new gender. It's called demisexual. Do you know what that is?
It's people who identify as demi-more.
That is on the spectrum. That is true. But no, that isn't what they call that. I don't know what they call that, but they call demisexual is when you're not, it's basically you don't like to have cheap sex. You only like to have meaningful sex. So basically, as far as maybe things are different. I don't really believe it. They say things are different where, like, chicks are into cheap sex and they don't care. I don't believe that. It's too primal. It's too lizardy chicks need a dude to pay for them and protect them when they're pregnant. So, like, there is a lizard in there in your brain saying, if you have sex with this guy, it has to be someone you can put in front of the cave for a while, who will stay there for you. You know what I'm saying? Like, birth control is supposed to disconnect that love and sex. Yeah. Because the love is for the protection, right? Am I not making sense?
So birth control, demisexuals should not exist since we have birth control.
I think that's what we're led to believe. So I know a young person who's like fits that definition of demisexual. And I said, oh, I know what that is. You're demisexual. And she said, no, I'm just straight. And I was like, but you know, you're not a cheap date. She was like, I don't want to be, you know, labeled on the gender spectrum. I'm like, it's just normal. You know, that's just normal.
Yeah. It might be kind of an insult if someone says, no, I'm sorry, I can't sleep with you. I'm a demisexual. And
it actually stigmatized. This label made it feel stigmatizing. It's
kind of like Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, the way that they try to pigeonhole people into parties rigidly and then blanket generalize based on that. Kind of doing the same thing when it comes to sexes, it feels like. Anyway.
Oh, that is so interesting. That is really interesting because when I look at Republicans, especially when it becomes a cult of personality like with Trump, I try to point out to people, like, everything you stand for, it's not even part of he doesn't really even have an ideology. That's why we have this crazy debt. I really don't know what's happening with the wars, but you take the label and people are allowed to throw things in that bucket if they have authority over the label that you don't want to be a part of, maybe. Like, I knew a guy in school I knew a couple of gay guys when I was in graduate school, and one of them, like, could have gone either way. He said, like, he could have kind of chosen, and the other guy was like, chicks, just, I love you, I want to be friends with you, but touching you would make me puke. I'm like, okay. Like, it's just like, he was like, whatever, further along on the spectrum. But he was a Republican, and he tried to make it, you know, try to stick with that, but he was so ostracized in the gay community that he just converted to Democrat.
Oh, that's interesting.
Years later, he was like, oh, I can't believe I was under that delusion for so long. Like, I'm so ashamed. And I was like, dude, you were like a hardworking guy who wanted to keep his money. Like,
Of what, being a Republican?
Yes, he was ashamed of his Republican. He was a closet Republican.
That's interesting that he was ostracized by the gay community and not by the conservative or Republican community. Oh,
right. No.
You know, have you ever heard of sapiosexual? Have we talked about this one before?
Well, does it mean you only like to have sex with humans?
It means you only like to have sex with people who it means you're only sexually attracted to intelligence is what it means.
Really?
That's what sapiosexual is.
Wow. I feel like that's just normal.
Yeah.
So what is only wanting to have sex with humans?
Homo sapiosexual, maybe?
Homo sapia. I think it should be sapiosexual.
Well, it already has a There's probably a lot.
Hetero,
we could probably
homo sapiosexual.
Do what?
I think it would be hetero homo
sapiosexual. That's going to be a mouthful. Pretty soon we're going to have these really long, drawn out.
I can't do mouthful. That's not going to work.
All right. Well, we'll save the rest of the sexual identifications for another show. There's a long list of them as well. Today, I want to play you some audio that's really interesting that is about the training exercises that the military is doing, or the special operations forces are doing over in Europe with the Ukrainians. And the exercise is called Operation Saber Junction. And Operation Saber Junction is an exercise that features 5,400 participants from the U.S. and 15 other ally and partner nations, including Bosnia, Bulgaria, Croatia, Georgia, Italy, Kosovo, Lithuania, Macedonia, Poland, Romania, Turkey, and Ukraine. And there was some forces from the UK as well. So a large number of ally forces are training with us. And the audio that we're going to be hearing is from the War College podcast. And the person who is going to be giving us the information is Marty Skovland Jr. He's a veteran First Ranger of the 1st Ranger Battalion, and he has been covering these training forces going on in Europe, where he says he witnessed the American Special Operations Forces training alongside their European counterparts, and that the threat that they are training for What's the threat that you believe they're training for, all these ally forces?
I have to assume it's Russia.
You got it. It's undecidedly Russia, according to this military correspondent. And he's going to give a little bit of that answer himself here. And I'm playing this clip to kind of set the background of their strategy, the type of approach they're training these military operations for.
And so I think when you talk about like, okay, what are they training for? What are the things they're looking at? It's okay. We've got, again, a special operations-esque force from Russia coming in that's doing shaping operations, trying to turn Germans against their allies and kind of establish footholds, and then a conventional force rolling in behind them. How do we stop that? How do we prevent this from turning into World War III? How are we shaping the information operations? That was one of the very interesting parts about it.
Okay, what he's saying there, he gives a little bit of background on that before, but it was too long to include, is he's saying that they're basing it off of what Russia did with Ukraine and that they sent in people to do shaping operations, quote, shaping operations, which is propaganda, which is information warfare,
right,
plain clothes people to go talk to people in the communities and the towns and to lay the groundwork for a military invasion is what he says that they did in Ukraine. And what he's saying here, at least what I gather that he's saying here, is that they're training to do the same thing, to get the propaganda forces in the plain shirts on the ground first to lay the groundwork for a military physical type of operation if it goes to that next. And then he goes on in this next clip to elaborate on the type of training operations and simulations that they're doing. So they're doing a whole broad spectrum, kind of like Vigilant Guard here in Georgia a few years ago. They have a whole variety of type of simulations and exercises that they're doing that he elaborates on here.
They have an entire fake intranet, I guess you would call it, but like a fake Twitter, a fake Facebook, that the military leaders were having to go on and kind of address, do counter propaganda messaging and shape the information operations, to kind of keep the locals, on their side, basically. And I think especially when you look at that through the light of, hey, how did the Arab Spring start? It started on Twitter. How are Ukrainians and Russians alike communicating on the Ukraine front right now? It's WhatsApp, it's Twitter, it's Facebook. The Russians are even, doing targeting based off of, hey, if you're popping up on Facebook or Twitter at the wrong place, you're probably going to get shelled on your location. So they're kind of introducing all these very modern elements and the things that we see from Russia, even, when you look at like election meddling and things like that of, hey, if you're going to fight this conventional near peer threat like Russia, then you have to address the information space, the cyberspace, the social media space, because that can influence the fight just as much as the tanks on the ground or the soldiers on the battlefild.
So while they do training operations...
Don't move on until
I'm not. No, okay. Go ahead. Go ahead and comment.
Yeah. There's just so much.
I know. There's a lot there.
It reminds me of the U.S. Army War College thing that I was talking about. It's probably here somewhere if you need the exact name, but we've talked about it before, where it was in 2000, I believe, where he starts talking about how like the internet's just going to change everything because like as I synthesized that and the Cass Sunstein conspiracy theories thing, document memo, it was very clear. It seemed to me, and the Quartz article about the start of Google, when you put all these things together, it looks to me very clear that they actually created the digital space in order for it to be the public square, for it to be the political meeting place. And he says, like, the Arab Spring started on Twitter. And I remember people at the time saying the Arab Spring could only have been started on Twitter. It could only, or Facebook or whatever, could only have been started the way it was, just spontaneously emerging everywhere at once through social media. And I would say, as somebody who, I've been using Twitter for 8 years. I have a radio show that reaches tens of thousands of people every Saturday, also for 8 years. And I have tens of thousands of tweets, original tweets from me. And nothing. I mean, one or two things have ever gone viral. And I come up with some good stuff. I come up with some interesting insights that people love. Like, just I get emails like, wow, that blew me away. But it's so hard to get things to like, yes, things do go viral. That's true. But for something like this, to hear a person in a position of the ability to do it, talking about how they're training warriors to use that space for war purposes, and he actually refers to Arab Spring, this to me means that's what it's there for. That's what it's there for. It's this connection between the digital space as it's virtual reality, right? I mean, it doesn't have to even exist anymore. And frankly, all they really need to do, like their dreams would be answered, their prayers would be answered if everyone just stayed home all the time. And if they fought the wars in the virtual reality space, like if human beings, they were going to the pub and talking about liberty in augmented or virtual reality, it would completely get them out of the way. And these guys would take over the land because that's all they really want. And when I was reading how the misdemeanor arrests of black men, particularly, but I think overall, has plummeted recently. It was not clear what the reason was. It wasn't clear if misdemeanors went down or just misdemeanor arrests or whatever. And one of the possible explanations was that people are conducting their beefs digitally.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, that may be true. It probably is true. And I believe it's a goal. They're just telling you to stay home.
To keep people to stay home. That's interesting.
Yeah. And they can even enslave you. Like the work that you do, if you're home and just doing digital work, like I just was I saw like a work app, I need a lead gen specialist, the chick says in this commercial.
Lead generator,
but she called it a lead gen specialist. That's what she typed in. And the guy virtually like gave her a little salute from his resume, and she pressed go, and then you see him in his house doing all this stuff for her, and she's still sitting in the same place, and it just pops up, and like their sales numbers are going through the roof. So,
this is the commercial?
Yeah. So at no point, like, you're just an extension of the computer at that point, and it always gets to what is the point of this whole enslavement in the first place, like what do they really want? And it's quite possible that we're the idiots for thinking that it is all digital. We are being penned in digital space, and they really just want the land, and they're going to get it.
Lindsey Graham was talking about taking back the land today, by the way. You said that made me think of Lindsey Graham was saying earlier.
I didn't hear that. And if you look at like that UN Habitat 1 and all the way, that's the very first UN thing about stuff like this from decades ago, all the way to sustainable development, the one theme that is always there is taking the land back.
Yeah, Lindsey Graham was talking about how you shouldn't give up land that you took through blood and sacrifice in relation to Trump and the troops over in Syria.
It's an international crime to keep land that you gained through a war of aggression. That's why I believe the UN has never accepted. I think Trump came out and said that he recognized Israel's right to the Golan Heights, maybe? I can't remember, but the UN does not recognize the land that Israel claims to have won in like the 1967 war, I think, because they say that the war was not justified. And I'm sure that's a matter of debate. I think they call it a preemptive war. And is that a real thing? I don't know if that qualifies as a just war. But the point is, you don't just get to keep it because you won it.
Yeah.
The basics, the law of nations does require a basic justification for invading the land in the first place.
Yeah, what are we, Vikings?
Yeah, and Obama pulled something like that with Crimea. He kept referring their definitions of what's just and unjust will change depending on the circumstance, which it does drive me crazy. And Obama used to say, Crimea does not have the right to have this referendum to join Russia because Ukraine has a right to territorial integrity, which is crazy. The Crimeans have a right to self-governance. I mean, you can't argue with that if you believe in the American Revolution. It just doesn't make sense. So territorial integrity is, to me, like a monarchical concept where, this is my realm. I have the right to collect the taxes here. And that's that. So but getting back to the digital thing, if there is a grand scheme, and they want to like kind of make the useless eaters atrophy and go away, virtual sex will do it. Get everybody to stay home in their cubicles and nothing will happen. But your mind, it's the Matrix. Your mind needs to be occupied.
Yeah.
And they need to get you to work. So you're not going to feed them with your battery juice, but you are going to put your keystrokes in for them.
Yeah. What I really found interesting about this clip is this guy, Marty, the military guy who's covering the training, he talked about how Ukraine and Russia are basically at war right now, and we're there training alongside many Ukrainians. And they see their training as something they're going to be using immediately because they're already in a conflict. And we're training. They make it clear that this is all about Russia during these next two clips and throughout this entire podcast. And this is 5,400 troops, 16 countries training for war with Russia. And he even mentions World War III at one point.
I know. I heard that.
And one of the major parts of the training, one of the staples of the training, is a fake social media, a fake Facebook, where they have officers train on how to spread propaganda. This is the part of the going in first to do the shaping operations.
But of course, they're doing it on the real stuff too.
Yeah, and this is my point. My greater point was that we talk a lot about, I know I always try to emphasize this, that the social scientists, the governments, the people in power have been training for psychological warfare for over 100 years, doing testing, research and development, psychology, trying to learn how to do it, to manipulate the masses in a way that it's outside the awareness of people.
And they do it. I mean,
they do it very well.
It sounds like they are not already doing it. They've been doing it this whole time. It's all field trials.
Yeah, and this is a lot, has the general population, a lot of us sometimes, it's easy to fall in the trap of thinking we can easily recognize propaganda and we can't be fooled. But I would ask people who jump to that conclusion if they have ever gone to a month-long training session with 16 different countries and 5,400 people to train how to spot fake news or propaganda on Facebook. Have we spent this much time training with these amount of resources? They are far, far ahead of us in their training, and I think just knowing that they're doing this types of thing should make us resist the urge to be emotionally triggered and polarized by the things that we see.
I'll tell you, if they were smart, they would interact. I follow back. I promote my Twitter account on my radio show, so I have a lot of followers, not because I'm viral, great, or anything, but I have a lot of followers, and I would not know if a new follower. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I would not know. I don't really know all my followers. I follow a lot of people, and I don't know a lot of them either. But people could communicate with me, and they do, who I don't know, and it sounds funny. And I think they're trying something happened recently where I'm not sure if it was somebody trying to manipulate me or what, but I believe that there are occasions when I am a target of like a trial balloon or a test of like a reaction. So they could take someone like me who goes out of her way to decipher fake news, to distinguish fake news from real news, trolls from sincere people. And if they had 1,000 different accounts, one person could have a lot of accounts and just push on me in different ways and really learn a lot from what I can see through and what I can't. And I'm kind of sophisticated because I do it all the time. That's like my job is to try to tell what's real and what isn't real. So they could take that information and then use those techniques. That's why I try not to ever out a troll. Yeah. I like them to keep coming back at me under the same handle so that I don't have to like refigure it out every time I get a weird.
Yeah, you don't want them to send somebody better.
Or themselves, like under a different name. Like, oh, she figured this one out. So now I know where to start with her because I just learned how I outed myself.
Yeah, good point.
So I try never to do that. But I'm just saying they could learn from me, from my reactions, how to deal with people who it's not their job. It's their hobby. I mean, I'm just saying those trials are happening right now on Twitter with you.
Absolutely.
And me and everybody listening. And they're really learning. And one person I heard
instant feedback.
Yeah, and one person I heard from something you played, or I think it was something that I found myself, where the guy said that a big part of, maybe it was one of those guys that you played for us last time, a big part of what they're doing over there is probing Russia's capacities and reactions. So Ukraine does have a war in I think it's just 2 of their provinces over on the edge with the eastern border with Russia, where they haven't given up yet. It's small. I don't know how significant it is to Ukraine, but it's possible they're keeping that going on purpose just to see what Russia's up to.
I'm certain that you're probably right about that. And he elaborates, he just marvels over this social media training that they're doing in these next 2 clips. Let me see here.
Well, let me
add
one thing while you're looking at that. Most of the countries that you mentioned, I believe, are former Warsaw Pact countries. So there were these countries between Europe and Russia that, like our NATO, as a kind of buffer or unifying force against the Soviet Union, they were a kind of buffer against Europe. And when George H.W. Bush negotiated the fall of the Berlin Wall, basically, Gorbachev, I believe, and he or one of his guys said, look, I'll give it to you. I'll get out. You can unify Germany. We'll let this whole thing collapse, but you can never put the Warsaw Pact countries into NATO. And they're all in NATO. Clinton brought them all in. Yeah. And but those are the buffer zones. I mean, that's very aggressive to be right up all those countries doing those exercises right up against the Russian border.
Yeah, it seems like a World War III lineup almost.
Yeah, like they're all just standing on one side or other of the border. But so it could be a provocation, it could be whatever. But I feel like I think it's information gathering primarily.
And training. It is going to be the training and the psychological warfare. Now here he goes into further detail.
Interoperability for forces is a big thing. That's what I didn't like about, one of the many things I did not like about the proposed North American Union.
Interoperability, what does that mean?
Interoperability, so that, like, what this said in the North American Union document by the CFR, written by Weld, signed by Heidi Cruz. I've talked about it a lot of times in the context of immigration. But one of the provisions is that they would practice interoperability of military and maybe even police on the borders between probably Canada and the U.S., but what alarmed me was the Mexican-U.S.
Oh, okay.
So they want their military and their police and everything to be able to interoperate. And the issues with that is we don't all have the same laws and protocols or rights and defenses. I mean, we do in the eyes of God, but not necessarily. So, and then there's always the other problem where the further you get away from camaraderie in the community with the authority. So your local cop whose wife is your kid's teacher and brother is the pastor, like, you know each other. That's like a small town Georgia. But as you get to where there's a federalized police force or a police force or army that doesn't even speak your language, isn't even from your country, you lose the sense of being on the same team, and then it becomes hostile and dangerous. And I almost feel like they want to make sure that they always have people who, the interoperability, I think, could morph into just swapping. Send the Americans to Mexico and send the Mexicans here, and then they'll have no compassion whatsoever or compunction against shooting people, the zombies or whatever.
Well, one of the lieutenants said that this exercise is about building friendships and relationships, teaching each other lessons about how military works and expanding from theirs. And they talked a lot in this podcast also about that very thing, interoperability. They didn't use that language, but they did talk about the relationships.
But that's like the international brotherhood of cops. Like, as that gets stronger, we get more of this us or them mentality, shoot first, ask questions later. The big thing that came out of Fort Worth, that guy, it's, you can't really see it from the video, but supposedly shot a woman through the window in her own house. She's black, he was white, and it's getting that racial angle. But one that was very, very disturbing that nobody cared about in Georgia, William David Powell was shot by cops. And he was defending his own home from a wrong address call. And for me, like, the message it's sending is, I wonder if there is a protocol out there that just says, if you see a gun, shoot the guy. And that will trickle down to the population to where they will no longer want to risk self-defense. And they'll start not having their arms because they're just afraid a cop is going to come kill them if they see it. So I feel like as the military or the police or whatever become this like supranational team, and they just think of themselves as the army of the elite, taking marching orders that transcend any kind of national unity, I just worry that our protections, which are the best ones, they like the North American Union thing, they said that they would make the laws the most restrictive. So they would want all the laws to be the same from Canada to Mexico, but the environmental laws and the labor laws wouldn't be the most liberal, like capital L liberal, liberated, libertarian like ours. They would be the least. They would be the most restrictive. So I really don't mind if there's no nation states. I'm in favor of that as an anarcho-capitalist, but not if there's a super state with the most restrictive laws, the most authoritarianism, the most totalitarianism. That is what I worry about with this stuff.
Yeah. And we hear a lot of talk over here about preparing for the certain election interference and impeaching for foreign election interference because Trump allegedly went out and tried to get a foreign country to help him with his election. And yet here we have an entire training session with 16 countries, 5,400 people training to do interference, maybe not in elections, but to use the same approaches that they say are just evil and horrible that is being used on us.
Well, that Stacey Abrams internship at Yukos Oil, which was a Kissinger operation, there was a lot of stuff on their website about how they're going in to teach the children about civics and everything in Russia.
Oh,
so,
geez.
I mean, that is interfering in the politics of that country. And that article, that action thing from between EU and Ukraine, it was like 500 points I tweeted yesterday of, how they want to go in and change the way local governments work, the way they propagandize their population for health. There were 500 items of how to make Ukraine EU. If that's not interfering with another country, and they ran the democratically elected president out of town.
Yeah. Okay, so he continues to elaborate on the detail of the propaganda training, which is what this is, in this clip. And this, to me, sounds like what the Committee on Public Information, the first large-scale organized propaganda organization for the United States, which helped get us from neutral into craving World War I, that Edward Bernays and Walter Lippmann were a part of. It sounds like the digital version. I was about to say the digital virgin. I don't know what that is.
Hey man, there are going to be, heaven is full of an infinite number of digital virgins.
There's going to be nothing but digital
future.
Virgins in heaven when you die.
It is that you've really stumbled onto something there. I think the digital version is going to be the carrot on the stick in the future.
Well, and also another interpretation of that could be the digital virgin is the one the government does not want to exist because it could be people who refuse to go online, who've never been online. They're off the grid.
Wow, yeah, like people who were born without the hole in their neck for the Matrix.
Yeah, the digital virgin.
I wonder, could you opt to be a digital virgin? Could you re-virginate in the digital?
Once it's done, it's done. I'm sorry.
Could you be a digital virgin?
You could be a born again digital virgin.
Come on, don't you get to choose? At least for the first time. Yes, I think so.
Yeah. All right. So here's the digital version of the Committee on Public Information propaganda campaign. The modernized version of the World War I United States propaganda organization. Is what it sounds like to me anyway, their tactics.
What does that look like? Can you talk a little bit more about that? I think that's just absolutely fascinating, this kind of propaganda war that happens online.
Yeah. So, for example, one of the days that I went into take kind of a peek behind the curtain with the planning cell there, it's the special operations planning cell that they have local at Hohenfels that sets up a lot of these scenarios. And they showed me a video where the commander of the 173rd kind of had to go on social media on video and address the locals of hey, we're coming here to support you. Do not side, basically this plea to not side with the Russians. And of course he didn't say Russia, but they had a notional name there, but everybody knows what we're talking about here. Right. And so he kind of did this plea there. And then you show the lower level leaders, putting out basically good news stories of delivering, MREs to villages that have been cut off by the fight and stuff like that. It was really interesting there's definitely, I think, a lot of learning curve there, especially for leaders who didn't grow up with the social media environment, who are now in charge of brigades and divisions and that sort of thing. But it was definitely a part of the scenarios. It wasn't something that you could ignore. You had to, if you were a leader, outside of the very most basic tactical level, you were aware of the information threat and the propaganda threat.
Newspapers, stories, training, and going to say, hey, don't listen to Russia. Listen to us.
Begging. He said begging.
Please. I'm pleading with you. Don't make me get my gun out. I mean, don't make me.
I wonder how they're doing it in foreign languages. I wonder how subtle it is.
That's a good question.
I mean, it's clearly not going to be what they call white propaganda. It's not going to be, hey, I'm a U.S. Army colonel and I want you to vote U.S. I doubt, there's no way they're doing that.
Here's the policies of our countries compared to the policies of Russia. Would like for you to think about it, then decide who you'd like to side with.
So wait, this is the U.S. Army College. Who are these guys again? This is different from what we heard last time, right?
Yeah, this is the War College podcast, and the guy talking is a guy named Marty Skovlin Jr., and he is a veteran of the 1st Ranger Battalion, and he's been covering the military trainings going on over in Europe. So he's a journalist now. Former military guy, so basically he's a propagandist for the military is what he is.
Right.
And yeah, he's telling about his experiences over there watching the training and just seeing how elaborate. I mean, he goes even further with how elaborate it is in this last clip. Unless you have another comment on that, I'll go ahead and play this one for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, they had a complete kind of intranet set up there and fake social media sites that you could actually interact on, and the civilians on the battlefield that were there, they were all posting how well you did your information campaign would influence whether the messages and the tweets that they were sending were favorable or not favorable. They even had media out there with Miles gear on and everything like that, where they would, come up and confront the checkpoints and try to ask questions. And there's a daily newspaper that gets put out that covers the news of the day. I mean, this is all like I said, the planning and the preparation that they put into putting this exercise on is so impressive to me. The fact that they're putting out an actual daily newspaper, that there's an entire intranet set up, and that the Op4 has their cell phones that in their tweeting and sending Facebook messages. I mean, this is, for a training exercise, I think that this is about as real as you can possibly make it in that aspect.
Yeah, that's the one that actually is more like the World War I propaganda thing digitally. Go ahead.
That blew my mind.
Yeah, go ahead. That's a good one.
First of all, remember when you uncovered the training operation that was going on when the segment of 85 collapsed?
Yes, the Vigilant Guard.
Right. And we did a show on a weeknight on WSB while that was happening, which was lucky because we, of course, are saying WSB is reporting on it, and we're just like, this is bull.
I know.
We don't believe it. And my boss was like, that was awesome. I was like, really? Okay. He liked it. But I had somebody call, a military guy call and said, you guys are smoking crack or whatever, tinfoil hats. We don't have time for these elaborate training exercises. And I always regretted not saying to him, oh, are you fighting an actual war right now? What is it that you're doing if not preparing for the emergencies? And what better way is there to prepare for an emergency than to simulate an emergency? I mean, it was just, he was wrong. We could probably go back and listen to that, and I could, it would be so obvious bull. But the fact that they're doing all this not for nothing, but I just heard Lindsey Graham say on that prank call, I was listening to it today, he said, the fake Turkish guy said to him, hey man, we can't piss off Russia. And Lindsey Graham was like, don't worry about Russia. Russia is doing all it can just to stamp out fires in Syria. It can't even stay here that long. It's at the end of its resources. They're no threat. I'm like, really? Really? Is that what you think? I mean, that's kind of what I think, because they have no credit, right? So they can't go into debt because they went bankrupt once. So their debt to GDP is under 20%. Ours is over 100%. And their defense budget is low. So that's why I really don't believe that they're ahead of us in much. Although if they're actually, the cronyism here and all that clearly absorbs, I would say, the vast majority of the defense budget. But the fact that they're doing all that there for those people when the prize is controlling the minds and gaining the mandate of the United States population. I mean, that's what these guys, the report from Iron Mountain is so instructive in so many ways, regardless of whether it was the literal truth, facts are facts, but truth is truth. Say it's a metaphor, it doesn't matter. It reveals, even if you just thought it up in your own head, it's not about it being black and white on a piece of paper, but the way they talk about it must be, to me, it looks exactly like how they think about it. We have a hierarchy here. We control the world as is, this world. And this world, unfortunately, is changing so that war, it's hard to justify war as a real organizing force in the world, because if everybody had nuclear weapons, there would be no more war, which is true. And that was Tesla's vision from the beginning, as a super weapon that everybody could have.
Nikola Tesla, not the more modern Tesla.
Not Elon Musk.
Not Elon Musk's Tesla.
Company, no. Of course, he hijacks the name Tesla because that, whatever, neutralizes it exactly right. So the report from Iron Mountain talks about how do you maintain the hierarchy without war. And for me, the entire process since then, since the 60s or nukes or whatever, was this process of keeping the world in stasis, not progressing, making sure that the structure of the world was still on the path they wanted it to be on when they first conceived of the UN or the League of Nations 100 years ago, and that they do things like put Nikola Tesla, away so that stuff can't get out, so the world cannot just organically develop. And then so as part of that effort, so they take half of our money and then they leverage 100% of the GDP on top of it. So they take half and then on top of it, they have trillions of dollars that they use for one purpose, in my opinion. Like, I believe it's a pathocracy. They're not doing it for us. They could solve all the problems that they run on if they, as a unit, wanted to. So for him to be doing this stuff for some exercise on over there, I would say you could expect them to be putting 10,000 times that effort into controlling us and our viewpoint, not for no other reason, but that what Americans perceive to be their opinion is the justification for the entire world order. You hear people in other countries saying, we, and they mean the U.S. I hear people from Japan, from Canada, from England, they say we, like all Westerners think of the United States president as their president, and like it's weird. Or whatever, like that kind of a thing. Like they have a stake in our government because our government kind of runs the world. It overly influences their government. But because we have this touchstone of the Bill of Rights, we have this panacea or like a facade, a patina of like justice as this country of self-governance, of democracy, of objective human rights. As long as we believe that, and we're like, well, but this is the democratic process. As long as we believe it and champion it and validate it, the world kind of, I think, accepts it. And so they would put all of their efforts to the last penny in making sure that this illusion of self-governance in the United States is maintained by the population.
Yeah, and the get out to vote drives, I know a lot of people don't like this, but getting that engagement and that stake in the process is what makes people remain under that control. And I know it's a double-edged sword, but Vladimir Lenin talked about it frequently in his organizing books. You must get as many people to vote as possible so that it justifies and validates the system of control that they have in place. Wow.
Yeah. Because I have thought that. I never heard you put it quite that way. I have thought of that before. I ask people that as a thought experiment all the time. When they talk about voting, I say, well, do you believe that any of these candidates, like these two candidates, anyone who might actually have a chance of winning, is really working for your interests, or even what they perceive to be your interests, or for what they perceive to be the interests of the American people? And invariably, or most of the time, people say, no, not really, but it's the less of two evils. And I say, what if we all stayed home?
Yeah.
If we all stayed home and 3 people voted and the person who won got 2 votes, would you do what that guy said? You wouldn't. It would completely invalidate it. It is only validated because you have said, I choose this.
Yeah.
I prefer this.
Exactly.
In my infinite wisdom, this person I choose to obey. Consent to his government.
I asked my friends a very similar question about that.
Yeah.
If we all stayed at home, then I'm saying I know it's not going to happen, but hypothetically, if we all stayed at home, it takes away their power. All of their power is gone if everybody stayed at home.
Why isn't Stacey Abrams calling for a voting strike?
You're right.
This system is upside down and racist. I was listening to a YouTube video the other day, and the opening premise, I forget what the station was. The guy asks his interviews, the first thing he says is, it is my position that white supremacy is the reigning ideology in the world and that all policy is meant to suppress people of color. And I understand where the guy was coming from. I get it. Like, he wasn't just like pandering politically. Like, that's how he feels. And I believe it. I would like to tell him personally, I am not on, I'm one of the people I'm no friend of that hierarchy, and they're not going to save me because I have lighter skin than this guy. But in that case, why work to maintain it? Why work to validate it? Why work to, to shore it up? Why say that it's valid? Because that's what you're saying. If you're saying get out the vote, you're saying the existing regime, the existing schema is valid.
Yeah, and it should really be a telltale sign when someone proposes the possibility. If you're in mixed company of liberals and conservatives and you propose the idea, I know because I've done it a number of times, the idea of what if none of us voted, then that's the one time in the night that they will all agree to be against you. And tell you how stupid.
Why not pull out of Syria?
Yeah, exactly.
You're sick.
Yeah.
You're a sick, dangerous, evil person.
Yeah, it's the same propaganda talking points that I've been hearing since I'm a kid. Oh, well, you can't do that. If you do that, you have no right to say anything. It's your civic duty to vote. But give me a break.
That's complete bull.
It's bull.
I have every right. I am not consenting.
I'm consciously choosing not to vote. And that's just as much of a choice as anything else. And
what you're saying is, I am not consenting to this contract that is not. What am I getting out of this?
Yeah.
Nothing.
And they just throw their hands up.
They throw their hands up?
Are you kidding me? You're not going to vote? Yeah. What I said to somebody the other day I was talking about this with, I said, if we think about it logically, if we separate ourselves from the emotional aspect of it as much as possible, because when people are voting, they're engaging in a fight that they feel like they're supposed to be part of, even though they don't have any idea what the group that they're throwing punches for, the leader of it, is going to do. They say the things that they like, so they join their team to fight. And so oh my God, my point just slipped right out of my head.
That's all right. Well, let me say, it made me think of a point,
Yeah.
which is that how do you reconcile the people at the Stacey versus Stacey debate saying we don't follow rules anymore because rules don't work, and having Stacey champion using the rules to make this system great again?
Yeah, I agree, and that is why
was it ever great?
Yeah.
For her? When was it great? What are we trying to get to?
For her, it's been pretty great since she was a kid.
I know.
But this is part of the reason why I've started to come to the belief, and we've both talked about this, that if Trump wins, and I think he will, that Stacey Abrams will be the leader of that resistance,
Absolutely,
which is now going to operate. They're going to do what they have to do since the system didn't work for them.
Yeah, I agree. It's strange to me because it's very clear that there is a movement from the top that is getting they have a lot of influence, a lot of press, where they're encouraging, especially young people, to not follow rules.
Yeah.
And then by the same token, if she wins, if she gets what she wants voting wise, then she will proclaim the mandate.
Yeah, exactly.
And she'll say that the mandate is valid.
Yeah.
So I would just argue that a valid position is that I have more sympathy for the hardcore, Black Power communists who say the land was won by invading it and slaughtering the people who lived here, because they wouldn't capitulate. See, you couldn't enslave the Indians who lived in North America, but you could enslave the ones in South America. So the ones in North America got killed for that reason. And we brought slaves over. Not we. I had nothing to do with it. But slaves were brought over to create the nation. And I appreciate the ideology that they fed the people to fight the revolution and gave to them in the Articles of Confederation. I appreciate the ideology. The ideology was a limited hangout. So let's run with it. It's like the Edward Snowden thing. I think it's a limited hangout. Putin isn't going to say he's fake. Putin's going to say, listen to that guy. He says you people suck. Run with the limited hangout. So for me, like, we could all benefit from it. Everybody, the descendants of slaves, the indigenous people who are left, like, take them at their word, use it against them. But from her position, I don't think she takes that position. I don't think she claims that it's a valid system that could have an underlying fairness, meaning equality of rights by individual. That's not what she wants. She wants to, by any means necessary, I guess, but turn the tables using the same system. I think that's the punchline that I am trying to articulate.
Yes. She'll use the system if it works for her. When it doesn't, she'll lead a revolution.
But she's still using the system.
She's using it
Her
currently.
revolution isn't going to end up in a different system.
She's using the system to make people believe that they are being suppressed and oppressed by the system to draw out more votes.
So she can be installed at the top of the same system.
Yeah, and even if
that's why she's
not
at the CFR. That's why she works for Kissinger. That's why she was in the State Department.
The very act of doing this nationwide voter training, which is what this is. She's training people to do get out the vote stuff and to basically the same stuff that she did in Georgia. And the very act of doing that gives her power nationwide and installs her at the top as a leader. She was called the most influential African American in the country by like the New York Times or something like 2 weeks ago. And it's because of this organizing effort and her ability to organize the masses and the power she's gained.
Can I rattle off, because it's been a couple of years since I rattled off her internships? Internships that she did as a youth. So she did that Telluride program in high school. She's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. She's a Next Generation Fellow of the American Assembly at Columbia University on U.S. global policy and the future of international institutions. This is a feeder program for the Department of Defense. The American Marshall Memorial. She's an American Marshall Memorial Fellow. The Marshall Plan, I believe, was the thing after World War II in Europe to rebuild Europe with American money. American Council of Young Political Leaders Fellow. That was in the Department of State. A Council on Italy Fellow, a British American Project Fellow, which is defined by some as like the deep state, your type of deep state, Binkley, or like the UK and the US meet in secret to control the world. A Salzburg Global Seminar Freeman Fellow on U.S. East Asian Relations. A Salzburg Global Seminar Fellow on Youth and Civic Engagement. An Aspen Rodell Fellow, a Hunt Keen Leadership Fellow, Harry S. Truman Scholar, that's very prestigious, and a Yukos Fellow for U.S.-Russian relations. And Yukos was a huge Russian oil company riddled with scandal, by the way. This is my notes myself. Broken up for unpaid taxes. Yes. Oh, yeah, and she was a tax advisor.
Sounds like she had a terrible upbringing and really rough childhood.
Right, she didn't. Let me just tell you, I did not have all this, and I wanted it. Like, I didn't want those particular ones, but like I wanted to change the story of my life from, urchin to holes of power. I've since kind of realized that my father was right about all of it all along, and that's probably why we were urchins, because he was just like, I'm a truck driver. Sorry, I'm not. I don't care how well you kids do on your SATs. I'm not throwing you into that. I'm not letting you serve the dark forces. But that I'm just pointing out, like, that is not a chick who is looking to overthrow the system.
Yeah, I thought you were going to stop it. That's not a chick. I'm glad you kept going.
I know.
I remembered what I was going to say earlier.
I thought you might.
I remember about the voting thing and how, like, Linda Sarsour and them, when we listened to that Women's March panel discussion thing where they were saying vote D straight down the ticket. We hear people say vote R straight down the ticket. People are encouraged to vote along those categories that they are pigeonholed into, and then by the mere fact that they're pigeonholed into them, and then it's turned into a two-team fight, they start to take on. You can start to manifest reality to defer to the party lines, even if that's not what you might believe. It doesn't matter. The other people will perceive you as believing that. So either way, that's how it works.
It's the serious stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Seriously, like that. Liberals are like, we need to get back into Syria. It's
Right.
like, listen to yourself.
Yeah. And so when you vote straight ticket, you're voting for people undeniably that you've never heard of. Almost everyone who just votes straight ticket just to do that, almost none of them have investigated and gotten to know all these candidates.
It's like when I was in Peru and everything was vote the pencil because people were illiterate.
And that's my point when I talk to people who are so rabid about this, that I'm like, don't you understand how illogical it is to go in and vote for someone who you've never heard of, never seen, and know absolutely nothing about, and yet you think it's my civic duty to do that?
Right. To validate, to just get your brand painted on your butt?
It's your civic duty to vote for this stranger who you know absolutely nothing about, who history has proven that people who run for these positions from time to time end up being very terrible people that you're giving power to. That is the most insane thing I've ever heard of.
Maybe when you're 18, you choose and they like brand you on your left butt or your right butt.
You get an R and an L?
An R or D, and that's it.
Yeah.
And then you get that forever. But it's like, that's how I feel about sports. But at least sports, it's like your school or your town. And that's the way, because you think that they care about you. You know what I mean? You think you're on the same team as the team of your school. Of course.
Gosh, no.
You know, but there are behind the scenes deals, and there's tons of like people throw games and stuff's fixed. Like you cannot count on that. But at least I understand that it's like red versus blue is really my town versus your town. Okay, I know that you're sensitive about that because of the way you were born.
Yeah.
I know you were born a Georgia Tech fan.
Georgia Tech fan is something. I nobody would choose that suffering ever.
Sorry. Is the Braves the same? We can't say that about
the Braves are almost more suffering than Tech. Just enough winning, but never actually, just one time did they go all the way.
What year
was that?
At least
a little bit. 1995. It's a long time ago.
In your lifetime?
Yeah, I vaguely remember.
You vaguely remember it?
Yeah, because even when I try to remember it, I try to suppress it because I don't want to have any good feelings.
It's like having a great wedding night and then like going through a horrible divorce. Like you're never going to look back.
Yeah, I'm not going to look back at that wedding night and enjoy that again. It only brings me more misery that it happened one time.
Because you could taste it.
Yeah, now I want it again.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's all right.
It's just funny.
So that clip, I just want to kind of reiterate that they're training people to create daily newspapers, to do a whole fake social media. I mean, social media is fake in and of itself. That's kind of a oxymoron to call something that's fake. Double fake. I guess it's double fake because people are fake on social media, but now they're creating a simulated social media where they're interacting and doing all the propaganda campaigns. We have 16 countries, 5,400 troops, creating fake daily papers, fake social media, doing fake propaganda operations, going into fake towns with fake people, begging them, please don't believe Russia, stay with us, all in preparation for a war against Russia and whoever they're allied with. All of these things are going on leading up to the 2020 election. Along with this going on, we don't hear about this stuff in the news. What we do hear about in the news is we hear about Giuliani's associates getting arrested and how the Giuliani associates that they were having get dirt on Biden in Ukraine somehow makes the Ukraine interference Russian interference. And we're hearing about escalating tensions in China, and we're hearing about escalating tensions with Iran, depending on which week it is of the month. So we have all of these war themes going on and these propaganda and these interference themes going on, and we're also training our troops with 16 countries for a war. I don't know who we're going to be fighting against. I don't know if the axis of evil is going to be Iran, Russia, and China or what, but there's something. We're building to a peak here. It seems like. I don't know how far away it is.
Yeah. When I was listening to that prank call of Lindsey Graham, like, he really sounded, it sounded like you could hear what he was going for. Like, he wants the free trade agreement. He wanted the F-35s. It was definitely in his interests. Like, he was on a mission. And I realize now how things are turning out. His mission was not necessarily like shoulder to shoulder with Trump's ideas or other competing interests. But he did say very casually, like, we just can't have Iran running Damascus. I mean, they are really, like, the thing against Iran. Like, there's back office stuff that happens with Iran also. And even, I think, the Iran-Contra thing, I think, involved, like, Israel sending stuff to Iran. So, like, it isn't even as simple as two sides in the Middle East. I don't know what the... Yeah, I mean, the more I look at this stuff, it does feel like these conflicts, Iran, Russia, China, that they're on one side. And I don't know what the heck we're doing with China either. I mean, we're really taking the gloves off. And I just...
We're in the midst of, you spoke to this earlier, a massive worldwide social experiment when it comes to social media and the internet, and the amount of propaganda that they're throwing at us and I'm sure everybody in the world is probably a new level of information that's ever been targeted at human beings. This quickly paced, this amount of information, these different strategies of emotional agitation that they're trying, they've been building upon this for a long, long time, but it did not used to be this way before the internet. Propaganda was still massive. They still had mass communications. You could still reach the world. You could still, as Edward Bernays put it, kind of whisper into the ear of the world from one place, from a central location. But now it's like they're inside the brains of the entire world.
And they're intending to. I mean, I'm convinced that the eyes and ears of our kids are being, at best, recklessly sacrificed to electronics because
absolutely
all the more access to, like, closer and closer to your actual, like, gray matter.
When we hear this stuff about this type of training that they're doing, it's not, like you said, it's not like they're just going to use this against Russia or against other countries. We already know that that's not the case. They're going to use it even if they have to accuse someone of being a Russian who is an American. They'll do that to justify using propaganda techniques against them.
I mean, they're throwing soldiers out as tripwires.
Yeah.
That's normal. I think I have an idea about China, though. It's a possibility that China was set up by Nixon and Rockefeller and a lot of people to grow and prosper and be successful. And I don't know if it was to do the thing that Rockefeller said, I think it was, who said, like, in order to control the whole world, you have to unite East and West. And in order to do that, you have to slow down the Western cog and speed up the Eastern cog, or they can't, like, fit together like an, engine and a transmission or whatever. So that was my metaphor, but analogy. So what might be happening, I think it's probably very hard to win over a completely foreign culture with a kind of millennial history that China has of not, they don't look up to the West. It's not, they had their own triumphs and superiority, and
they've been around for 2,000 years.
Yeah, I'm sure more than that. I assume. I mean, I know, like, the writings and stuff. We didn't give them a hand up out of nothingness, and so we went over and we westernized them. We gave them this opportunity, the tools, the defense stuff, tech, and everything. And they brought a lot of the surrounding areas and their own backwoods out of the rice paddies and into the factories, which serves a couple of purposes. It creates more, I hate to use the kind of communist nomenclature of slave labor, but who knows if you could say psychologically manipulated, economically manipulated workers, at the same time that they open up the new market, so that you just keep, that kind of expansion is, they're not going to stop. It reminds me of the paint company that says cover the earth, and it just is throwing a can of paint over a globe. I'm just like, yeah, you're not getting that. That's what they're doing. They're not stopping until they've covered the earth. But now China sees that, and they're doing, like, the Silk Road, and they're way into Africa, and maybe it's time to pull back on that, like the internet. The Department of Defense gave us the internet, and how are they going to get it to stick to catch on by giving us all this information and give us a dopamine and giving us connections and giving us, this sense of stardom or whatever. And now, I mean, you can just see the hammer come down on that. I mean, the surveillance started under Obama, and the censorship on February 14th, 2018, the internet closed. So that you can just see they gave it to us, started in the Department of Defense. Nobody even disputes that. And then they shut it down. And maybe that's where we are with China.
Possibly.
It's possible.
What I wonder about is whether or not in the propaganda studies a lot, they talk a lot about how in order to get a country ready for war, that leading up to the war, you unify them behind the purpose of going to war. Unless you're trying to destabilize that country, then you divide them up so that they will lose the war. I'm curious if they're going to continue to attempt to divide America leading up to a war, which would mean subverting, which I think would completely eliminate the democracy, even the shell of a democracy as we know it altogether, or if they're going to unite us, positioning us to be victors in a war.
Well, yeah, I think seems clear to me that the divisiveness is coming down from the top, and that it could be that they are constructing a narrative or preparing a narrative, preparing a legacy where, like, how they say that we got into World War II because FDR wanted to get us out of the Depression and it worked.
Yeah.
Right. That's a narrative that I don't buy. I think it's more likely that he kept us in Depression to justify going to war.
Yeah, yeah.
To make up a story. And I think it's possible that civil unrest will be used as a mildly sophisticated argument to justify war. So the FDR keeping us in Depression to take us to war, or using the Depression to get us out of war, isn't really something that you necessarily feed to the masses, but you use it to write history in a plausible way.
Yeah.
And
I see what you're saying.
That could be what's happening on one level.
Right. And when
they're doing it for a reason.
And when you label half the country who doesn't agree with progressive values as being essentially Russians, then in a way, when you write history, you can say the country was united against the Russians.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if I try to look at that sometimes, when you go back to World War II, World War I, or any war, you look back, or Lincoln, they'll call people who object to the war foreign agents.
Yeah. They've always done that.
I think it's tautological. It's like, well, you were obviously Russian because you didn't support the war.
Yeah,
it's like, no, but I'm not. I just was thinking about it.
All right, I know we got to wrap up. I want to read the other types of exercises on top of the social media ones they're doing, because a couple of them I think you'll find interesting. One of them is this is called Wet Gap Crossing, and they are training troops on amphibious vehicle training. And I know that you brought up amphibious vehicles.
Yes, Jeffrey Allen Lash. Everybody look up Jeffrey Allen Lash.
The lizard guy.
I mean, no, he was an alien.
Yeah.
And he had an amphibious. That is the one story, the only story that makes me really really aliens. Okay.
Yeah, maybe he test ran this.
Yes, he had legally registered guns and amphibious vehicles in California that cannot be legal. So they were registered. Jeffrey Allen Lash. Keep going.
Another training exercise that they're doing is that they evacuated a simulated U.S. embassy during Saber Junction, the training operation. So evacuating the U.S. embassy. Wonder what. And this is this is in Europe.
Oh my gosh. You have to remember, these are what to watch out for.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Good thinking.
Nice.
Third one is they conducted a massive air assault operation in Germany. Simulation operation.
Oh, by the way.
Hundreds of paratroopers.
This Russia stuff is still, since World War I, still to this day, over 100 years. This Russia thing is about keeping Germany away from Russia. Didn't Trump even say on that Zelensky call Germany is not being kosher here?
I think he might have.
Yeah. It's all about Germany, the industrial powerhouse, and Russia, the resource powerhouse.
He talked in this clip. I don't know if it's one of the ones I played you, one of the other ones I heard, but he was talking about the training being in Russia, part of it being in not Russia, part of it being in Germany, and saying, I think I might have played that clip where he's saying we're telling the German people don't believe the Russians, believe the Russians. He
definitely mentioned Germany, yeah.
So it goes right to what you're saying. They specifically are training to tell Germans.
Trump says that all the time.
Yeah, they talked about how the Russians will send their guys in there, their shapers, their opinion shapers, propagandists in there to shape the narrative in Germany, and that part of the training is that we need to go in there and counter that narrative and tell the Germans, don't believe the Russians, believe us. I mean, this is a repeat of what happened in World War I, just not using digital. We were digital virgins back then, but now we're all digital sluts.
Want Germany to be our allies. I wonder how Brexit will play into that, because then you can actually have independent trade agreements. And what Lindsey Graham was saying about Turkey, the free trade, it was really interesting. It was like we need to have he calls it a free trade agreement. I'm sure that's not what it is, but we need to have a trade agreement with Turkey. And I mean, he basically said, then there will be no turning back. Then we will be one.
We need to do something that we can't turn back on.
You will be assimilated to the Borg.
Well, I think that's going to wrap it up. We'll have to. Assimilating to the Borg, I think, is a good place to end.
Okay.
We can do the political campaigns and the political campaign deconstruction, the ads in the next one.
Okay.
Thank you for your time, and thank everyone for listening. Thank everybody who supports the show, who continues to support the show in a variety of ways.
Say,
go ahead.
Because of Drive Time News Blast, which takes so much time and effort, some people have stepped up and contributed, even though I don't want to use the time on that show to say, oh, please contribute. But it's greatly appreciated. Really, really appreciate it. And we're continuing to grow with that, and we're getting good feedback. So share the show. Please do contribute. It's very much appreciated. And hopefully we can keep the positivity going.
Yes, and you can contribute via Patreon or PayPal or any way that you have in your resources, whether it's sharing the show, telling friends, telling your mom or dad, just helping us grow.
Or even posting some great articles and insights to the press pool at thepropreport.com.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that, and it keeps me informed.
Yeah,
so that's another thing.
Exactly. We get a lot of good stuff on Twitter and in the press pool that helps out. Like I get signaled to stories I hadn't found or videos I hadn't found. That's always very helpful. Thank you for that stuff. Continue doing it. We love it. And thank you, everybody, for listening again. We will talk to y'all next time. You can find all of our links at thepropreport.com, the donate links, the share links, and the subscribe links. Talk to you later, Monica.
Later.